Tuesday Taco Day. I love it.
I guess just
Tires, Tuesday Tire Day. That's why we had the tires out there. Tuesday's Tire Day.
and Taco Day.
Tired, probably.
Tires, yeah. Tired too, yeah. The heart rates were up in the red zone a lot.
How was the holiday break for you guys, and what's it like kind of getting back into the swing of things and preparing for this week?
Personally, I think it's good for everybody, not only the players, but obviously the support staff, the coaches. It's always nice to get a break, and kids obviously have to take care of schoolwork and finish up finals, and then the most important part is to get to go home and breathe a little bit and just relax and be with family. And then obviously we've talked before about coming back this time of year where they don't have school and they can just focus in on being a normal individual other than a hockey player, and we can make some real good gains, I think, for the second half of the season as you go through these next 3 or 4 weeks.
What have you learned about how important a quick start to the second half is?
Well, the big thing is to try to catch up, with where we finished off. Anytime you take a couple weeks off, you're trusting that the players are going to stay active. They're not going to become couch potatoes. And because one thing about hockey is it takes a while to get into shape, especially in game shape. It doesn't take very long to get out of shape. And once you get into a routine, and once you get into a rhythm, you're comfortable. And then all of a sudden you're taken out of that. And so you have to be smart here the first couple of days of practice. The nice thing is, we got a couple non-conference games, and then we really started to get into the meat of our schedule, with Duluth home here and then going off to Ohio State. So, the next 6 games will be a great way to start the second half, because it's going to force us to catch up and really get up to game speed quickly.
But these are important names in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, Quinnipiac are very important because, if you follow, women's hockey and our non-conference schedule, and if you do well in it, and especially if your opponents are with what, Quinnipiac's at right now as far as being a top 5 team and having a great start to their season. And so if you do well in those non-conference games and, your opponents are, the top 5 or top 10 in the country, those give you a lot of points at the end of the season when they start making adjustments and placing teams. So it's really important. And, you don't get much room because then you come back to Duluth here and then you're off to Ohio State. So it's almost like playoff hockey in the early part of January.
How important is that to be focused right away? You talked about having the tires out today and kind of just trying to get them back into that sharpness that they're going to need right away on Saturday.
Yeah, and then, so those are the things I look at as far as, what we need to work on in practice. So, yesterday's was, a lot of them traveled, were up early. You're not going to try to exhaust them and, have them so tired that they're not affected the next couple of days. But, just try to touch the puck, try to handle the puck, work on the skill part of the game there early on. And as they go through that process, their legs will start to catch up. I call it like riding a bike. I haven't ridden a bike in 2 or 3 years. I get on it and maybe get a little bit uncomfortable the early part, but as I go through it, I'm more comfortable. And that's what's going to happen. And the big thing is you don't have school. And so for the teams that are participating and practicing and playing games right now, that's a big, something that's not on their shoulder, that's weighing them around, and they're not worried about studying, they're not worried about going to class tomorrow, getting papers done, they can just focus on hockey. So we generally practice, like you see, a little bit earlier in the day, so they get up and, we get them exercised, we get what we need to get done, and by, early afternoon, they're completed in what they need to do. So, and as a player, you'd rather play a game than practice. So they're going to get that Saturday and Sunday.
How's Jane doing? I saw she's back on the ice.
She's doing better. She's just moving along. Those type of injuries that she sustained. There's no set timeline where if you break a bone and normally 4 to 6 weeks is going to heal. I can do things. Those, it's especially being in a goaltender, where if she was a forward or a defenseman, she'd probably be back in active practices wearing a regular jersey. But as a goaltender, some of your movements that the other players don't have to do, that you have to do, it just makes it a little bit more challenging. But she's making progress. She's moving along, and hopefully it won't be too long before she's in a full practice doing a full workout.
Kemi did well though with playing the back-to-backs before break.
Yep.
That has to give you some confidence that she can. You don't have to rush Jane to get her back.
Yeah, and they're both, they're both wanting to play back-to-back. They both wanted to become the #1 goaltender, and unfortunately for Jane, with the injury and Cami going in, she got an opportunity to do that, and she showcased herself well, and especially up in Mankato where, you go stretches where you don't get a lot of shots. Sometimes those games are a little bit more challenging, a little more difficult, but she did what she needed to do to give us a chance to win. And so I think from her standpoint, especially after the Minnesota series, playing that second game, getting thrown in right away without any kind of warm-up, it just helped with her confidence. You can just see that she's more comfortable, she's more confident in her game, and that's certainly a good thing to have.
From the PIAC this week, is there any good team overall, but is there any part of their game that you think is especially going to be challenging to match up with?
They just, they obviously their confidence is going to be high. They're going to be playing at home. They've beat some quality opponents up to this point, and so I'm sure they're going to be real fired up, and it should make for a real interesting and a really challenging game for us. And I'm anxious to see how we come out of break and see where we're at this particular time, and we'll be challenged, and hopefully similarities between the way Duluth plays, especially the way Ohio State plays. There's a lot of similarities where their defensemen are very active. They pinch a lot. They try to create their scoring opportunities with a fourth or fifth man in the rush. So it'll be a good structure to play against, and good way to start the second half, because it's like you got to wake up right away. You don't have any time to sleep or wait for something to happen. It'll be thrown right into the fire right away, and I'm anxious to see how we respond. But we got a couple more days of practice, and we made some strides from yesterday. Tomorrow to me will be the most challenging day. I call it hump day, that third day. Whether when you're starting the season or come from, it'll be more challenging because kids are excited to be back. They've practiced, they've pushed themselves a couple days. Now the third day, it's like, oh my gosh, my body's tired. And so we'll push ourselves through tomorrow, and then hopefully by Thursday we're at a comfortable level, and then we're traveling, playing, practicing Friday, and then it's 2 afternoon games, and it'll be a quick trip, but a good way to start the second half.
You've talked about how key it is to be able to come out against Quinnipiac and then get into the year schedule and stuff. So just having them right after the break, going into the new year and stuff, how much does that just help your teams up going through the challenges with their first weeks?
I think we all, whether the coaches or the players, we like consistency in our daily schedule. You just have certain habits in what you're doing, and as you navigate through your job, and the players are no different. So the difference between our second half and our first half, we're going to have consistency. Now we're going to have 8 straight weekends of games, and so a bunch of them are in the afternoon. As I mentioned before, I like afternoon games where you don't have to sit around all day. You get up, you have your pregame meal, and you're on the rink and you're playing, and then you get to bed at a normal time in the evening, and so you really get into a nice routine. And so our first half was like hit and miss. We had a crazy November. We had a good first half, and now it's as we mentioned in September at our first press conference, it's a process of trying to continue to get better. So I'm looking for things to improve. They just have to happen quickly now because of our opponents the next 3 weekends.
You've got, this second half has got a lot of great matchups.
Yeah.
You got the Fill the Bowl, which is fun, and I know you've got that outdoor skate
Yep.
on January 10th. You know how much the fans are important to
Yeah.
the program. That's a fun day, isn't it?
Yeah, and the first half, if you're a hockey fan, with our schedule, is a little bit challenging. But a lot of people have come up to me as I navigate my life away from the rink, and when do you play home again? When do you do this? And so we'll get into a routine. You have Duluth coming in, we have Ohio State coming in, with St. Cloud and Fill the Bowl. So there's a lot of exciting weekends, a lot of good hockey to be played. And I think from a coaching standpoint, especially the second half, you want to get in meaningful games that you're playing, against really good quality opponents, because whether you win or you lose, you end up improving by playing those games. And so we just have to get ourselves off to a good start. It's like starting the season over again. That first period, Saturday afternoon, it's about playing downhill. It's about getting the puck. It's about playing with energy and excitement. And generally the second half, this first 3 weeks, you see that because, again, you don't realize taking school away, how relieved and how excited the players get, because now they can just be, they can be hockey players, and when they leave the rink, it's they're just a normal individual navigating around, and it's just fun time of year for everybody.